Let's explore autistic history and the Autism Wars. This is part 31 in a series. We left off in the last part, still in the 90s era of the timeline, and from the autistic point of view from Jim Sinclair, sharing their experiences back in the 90s when they organized Autism Network International, or ANI, and those experiences with parent-founded and led autism organizations. So I left off after they were describing autistic to autistic first contact and that feeling of home that they found and creating a culture and community together in small numbers. So I'm going to pick back up there and see what else was going on. Kathy and I and Rita and Doyle and their children continued to meet occasionally in St. Louis. After I moved to Syracuse, New York in 1994, my house became another location for autistic visits. These gatherings were sometimes the occasions for first meetings with new online friends. Kathy and Ray's wedding in 1994 featured both the presence of a contingent of autistic friends among the many non-autistic family and community members and autistic cultural influences on some of the wedding customs. Autistic cultural influences on some of the wedding customs. Now that's kind of groovy. What were those customs they incorporated? All right, says here, Kathy's fixation with flags was incorporated into part of the ceremony itself, and several of her autistic friends presented her with decidedly non-traditional gifts, such as a used book in Russian that had been discarded by a library. That is cool. All right, relating to her special interests and fixation. So yeah, that was a very, very specific book for her very specific interest. So that is really kind of cool that was incorporated. All right, so next up, becoming a presence at autism conferences. A growing number of us were attending NT conferences or NT Run. Again, that means neurotypical if you are not used to the acronym. NT Run Autism Conferences. Another way I could say that is non-autistic led, non-autistic run autism conferences. So some of us were even being invited to speak at conferences. But now we weren't just isolated individuals lost in the chaos of the conference. More of us were already acquainted with each other before attending a conference, and we were able to plan in advance to get together at the conference. At the group level, ANI began to exhibit at conferences. Being a conference exhibitor meant that we had an assigned booth or table in the exhibit hall where we could set up displays and hand out information about ANI. The ANI exhibit became kind of a home base for autistic people during the conference. While the exhibit halls were usually noisy and crowded, there was space behind the table and also under the table, where a few people could sit and not be jostled by the crowd. Despite the difficult sensory conditions and the pervasive negativity of the rest of the conference, content autistic people would gather at the ANI exhibit to talk, laugh, stim, and revel in each other's company. We also found places to gather after hours. While NT conference participants were attending banquet dinners or entertainment performances or other large group activities. Strobing lights too? I don't know. Alright, autistic people in pairs and small groups were finding quiet spots in hallways and cloakrooms and parking lots. Most of us couldn't afford rooms at the expensive hotels where the conferences were held. I often slept in my car while attending conferences, but if someone did have a hotel room, that became another enclave of autistic space. This next section is titled Finding Home or Creating It. This kind of live contact was not something that was of interest to every autistic person we encountered online. Obviously, if someone wasn't interested, he or she did not choose to come to the in-person gatherings, but for those of us who did come to them, often driving hundreds of miles and sleeping in our vehicles or on the floors of other people's rooms, there was a powerful, shared will to make contact with others like ourselves. Our autistic contacts came to be a very important part of our lives. Many of us had never had friends before and had difficult relationships with our families. Finding people who actually understood us and liked us, and whom we understood and liked in return, was a life-changing experience. A&I had an exhibit table at one particular conference in St. Louis in early 1994. Doyle was able to arrange for a group of us to camp indoors on an empty upper floor of a large office building near the downtown conference center. All the interior walls on that floor had been knocked out for a not yet completed renovation process, except fortunately a restroom remained intact with walls and a door. That is fortunate. Naked support beams were exposed throughout the space. Bits of crumbled plaster and other building materials were everywhere. Piles of debris lurked in corners and against walls. There was no furniture. We brought our own mats and sleeping bags, as well as a couple of floor lamps and some empty refrigerator boxes for anyone who wanted to sleep in one or needed to retreat alone to a dark, enclosed space for a while. Incredible. In this huge, dim, dusty, cavernous space, 8 adults, along with Doyle and Rita's young son, who was not disabled, spent the weekend. During the days we went to the conference, took turns staffing the A&I exhibit and talking to curious parents and listened to presenters talk about all the tragedies of our lives. In the evenings, we returned to our cave. Triple ticks, eh? Whoa. Which, like a legendary fairy hill, was transformed into a magical place of celebration. During our second day of camping out in this building, Doyle pointed out the window at a radio tower and mentioned that it was for sale. He jokingly asked me if I thought we should buy it. I asked what possible use we might have for a radio tower. Then I looked around the room and, in keeping with our frequently shared experience of having always felt like aliens on Earth, I remarked that we could use the radio tower to send a message to the mothership, a common reference in science fiction stories, telling it that we were all together now and it could come retrieve us and take us home. Right? This mothership can come get us and take us home. Well, I'm going to wrap this video up here and we will pick right back up at this section in the next video. So this again is an article that was published by Jim Sinclair in 2005, and thank you for exploring a bit more autistic history with me.